the tallest dive tower in the Western Hemisphere, but I am not allowed to jump off of it. And this is the women's high dive height at 20 meters. Can I jump off this one? This one's 15 meters. That's not that bad, right? 10 meters? Maybe? 7 meters? Maybe? How about 5 meters? I took diving lessons as a kid. Maybe I could jump off of 3 meters? Nope. But the pros, well, they can jump off whichever. But this little 1 meter diving board, I can jump off of this one.
There's rules, no creative or dangerous dives. You have to have one bounce for safety, and then it's just a front dive. I actually have to say it's pretty boring.
But wait, that's not the childhood I remember. Diving boards used to be everywhere, but now they have practically disappeared from everyday life.
They were pretty common. If you went to a pool, you could dive. Now you got to find a program.
So while this pro diver psychs himself up to hurl his body from 90 feet in the air, why and how did diving boards disappear from our everyday lives? The obvious answer is, of course,
Insurance.
Insurance.
which, yes, insurance is a part of it, but not for the reasons you might think. To find out why diving boards sunk, I went to the Fort Lauderdale Aquatic Center, the epicenter of American diving, and asked the experts how diving has evolved. Oh my God, I cannot believe that people choose to do this. What I didn't expect to discover was that the disappearance of backyard diving boards was tied to one very big cover-up. And my big takeaway? Insurance companies shape our reality much more than I ever thought possible. So shall we dive in? Diving boards like this weren't always a part of American pools. Before the late 1940s, residential diving boards looked a little bit like this. Stiff wooden planks bolted onto metal frames, sometimes covered in canvas-like material or rubberized fabric, not very flexible. Then came this innovation.
We have Duraflex springboards, and they were developed out of an airplane wing.
That's right. In 1949, Ray Rood, an aircraft mechanic, grabbed a rejected Lockheed airplane wing panel and mounted it on a friend's backyard pool. It flexed. It launched. His company, Duraflex, changed competitive diving forever. And they're still the standard today at elite facilities like the Aquatic Center. But for backyard pools, that kind of engineering, meaning mostly that price tag, just didn't make sense. And take this warning from the Aquatic Center's head diving coach. Duraflex boards and residential pools just do not mix.
I would suggest not getting one of those unless you got a big backyard.
Okay.
If you dive wrong, you can go halfway across this pool, which in most backyards is out of the pool.
Oh, okay.
And you go so high, the pool needs to be deeper. So most backyard pools are not that deep. That's why they make the real stiff fiberglass play fun diving boards in backyard pools.
The diving boards most of us are used to were made by these guys.
The little plant of S.R. Smith Company.
Founded in 1932 in Oregon, S.R. Smith became the affordable, mass-produced go-to name in residential diving gear. And as these diving boards started to spread across suburbia, safety questions started to surface. In elite competition, Duraflex boards are tightly regulated, deep water, strict specs, controlled conditions. But in backyards, it was a different story. Home pools and diving boards followed voluntary guidelines from a trade group called the NSPI. Keyword voluntary. Take this pool at the Fort Lauderdale Aquatic Center. It's 20 feet deep.
We have a sparger. It's a bubbler system. We have an air compressor that will have bubbles that will come up through the bottom of the pool and create this big bowl of bubbles that they can dive into. It creates a softer landing.
This pool is built to Olympic standards and regulated like a professional sport, not a backyard pastime. The NSPI's minimum depth requirement under a residential diving board is 7.5 feet. And here is one of the most popular residential diving board models installed on this type of residential pool, the S.R. Smith Model 606. Builders called it standard. Parents assumed it was safe, but I don't know. Was it?
Hi, I'm Nick, the CEO of Dynamo, and I'm here to tell you about our new show, Real Big Machines. We're a business media company, but when we say business, what we mean is people working together to create the world around us. And sure, a lot of that happens over email and in conference rooms. But some of the most important business getting done is people building things, moving things, keeping the world running. It's someone really skillful operating a machine the size of a building. How do these machines work? Why are they so big? Who builds them? Who buys them? What does it tell us about the economy? So get in the cab with us, strap in. This is Real Big Machines.
So here I am thinking that diving boards must be pretty dangerous, because why else would they have pretty much disappeared? Even at a professional facility like the Aquatic Center, public diving is gated to just these standard boards with a tight schedule and lifeguard oversight. To understand why all these controls are in place, let's rewind to a time when perception around risk had started to shift. Remember these guys?
Savino and Barnes, injury attorneys, 800-888-8888.
So there was a time when legal ads were banned in nearly every state. They were deemed unethical. But then, thanks to a bombshell U.S. Supreme Court ruling in 1977, lawyers could advertise for the first time.
If you've been injured in an accident, we would like to help you.
Call a lawyer who will help you get every benefit the law provides.
It costs nothing to discuss your case with me.
By the 1980s and 90s, TV was flooded with personal injury commercials. Big jury payouts and dramatic media coverage ramped up lawsuits. And this was a big deal for, you guessed it, insurance companies. This completely changed the legal and litigation environment, a big factor in how insurers model risk. Now, Americans saw danger everywhere and knew exactly who to call. The risk of lawsuits was suddenly much, much higher. At the same time, something else was stirring behind the scenes that would alter how insurers viewed risk. A money problem in the insurance industry. In the early 1980s, interest rates were sky high in an effort to fight inflation. And insurance companies were quick to pounce because they wanted to make money. Here's a simple look at how it would work. In the 80s, high interest rates meant big returns on safe investments, if you had cash. As an insurance company, I wanted more cash fast. So I cut the price of premiums, which is the monthly price customers pay for coverage, to pull in more customers. Their payments became my investment pool. Then I invested that money and bet the investment gains would outweigh any future claims that I might have to pay out. But here's what insurers didn't plan for. Those returns would not last. Interest rates peaked above 19% in 1981, then steadily fell, dropping below 6% by 1986. That meant insurers' investment income, a major source of profit, shrank fast. Enter the insurance liability crisis. With the investment gravy train slowing down, insurers realized they'd been underpricing risk because they overestimated investment returns. And now they couldn't offset the lower premiums with investment gains. So they started to overcorrect, treating even the perception of danger, or risky vibes, as costly and sometimes flat out uninsurable. Car rental companies, bowling alleys, daycare centers, these were all collateral damage of the 1980s insurance liability crisis. Well, luckily for insurance companies, something was brewing that would make some of these hikes totally justifiable. In 1983, the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission released a report on spinal cord injuries in sports. And what they found sparked national panic. 66% of all sports-related spinal cord injuries came from diving, and 98% of those diving injuries resulted in quadriplegia. Panic ensued. Industry and safety councils held emergency conferences to address the diving injury crisis, and insurance companies ran with it. But remember the NSPI? Well, it wasn't willing to lay down. It commissioned specialist researcher Richard S. Stone to reanalyze those findings. And what he found flipped the narrative entirely. 75% of the diving injuries cited in the study didn't happen in backyard pools. They happened in oceans, lakes, and rivers. Of the pool-related injuries, 95% occurred in shallow water, and almost none involved a diving board at all. Diving boards had unfairly taken the hit, but by then, the damage was done. For example, in the DC area alone, over 100 community and private pools removed their high diving boards in a single summer. So badly interpreted data at a time when insurance companies needed something to blame to raise rates made diving boards a very easy target. The perception of danger was enough. In insurance, perceived and emerging risks can sometimes inflate projected losses, even without hard data, shaping both pricing and coverage. It's the same reason many homeowners insurance providers exclude pit bulls, meaning any injuries or damage caused by the dog aren't covered. This happens despite research showing that breed alone isn't a reliable predictor of aggression. Insurers sometimes act on the perception of risk when the data is inconclusive or hard to verify. And for diving boards with perception already on the decline, this next case would deliver the final blow. In 1991, 16-year-old Sean Manili dove off a backyard diving board and broke his neck on the pool slope, rendering him a quadriplegic for life. Manili's family hired a lawyer named Fred Zeter. Zeter combed through thousands of pages of data and records and found something explosive. It turned out that back in the 1970s and 80s, the NSPI knew that the specific combination of the kind of diving board Manili jumped from, remember this one, and the kind of hopper bottom pool he landed in could be incredibly dangerous for tall, athletic boys, like Manili. The NSPI's own hired scientist had found this, and an independent engineer confirmed it a decade later. The NSPI could have updated its safety standards for pools and diving boards, which might have prevented injuries like Manili's. But this also would have exposed its members to costly retrofits and potential lawsuits. So instead, the NSPI did something else. It launched an education campaign telling divers to steer up, essentially angle their bodies away from danger. It kept its standards and shifted the responsibility to be safe to the swimmers. And when all this came out at the Manili trial, the jury was not having it with the NSPI. It awarded Manili a whopping $11 million in a verdict affirmed in 2000, more than 10 times the size of any previous diving board-related verdict. The jury found the NSPI breached its duty and was a direct cause of 60% of those damages. The NSPI filed for bankruptcy twice. It emerged from bankruptcy, rebranded as the Pool and Hot Tub Alliance, and did something pretty drastic in 2002. It withdrew its standards entirely, and that is when diving boards really sunk. By withdrawing its standards, the NSPI had created a standards vacuum from 2002 to 2012, leaving the industry without any official pool depth and diving board guidelines. Builders had nothing to follow, insurers had nothing to price against, and courts had no baseline for deciding fault. In the absence of standards, insurers had no consistent basis for estimating risk exposure, so pricing grew more cautious and coverage became more limited. Even when diving boards were not statistically the problem, they were still treated like one, which is a misconception that Dave is still trying to combat today.
If you start looking at statistics, if you're learning how to dive in a diving program, very few accidents. But if you dive off a boat and hit the coral or a sandbar, that's a diving accident. Same thing with shallow swim pools in communities. You dive in, hit the bottom, it's a diving accident. It's a diving accident, but none of it has to do with diving boards.
In the early 2000s, one research firm found that the share of backyard pools with diving boards fell from 50% to 38% in just 5 years. And by the 2010s, builders said that new pools with boards had become a rarity. An icon of summer fun, now practically extinct because insurers had no roadmap to follow. Yes, insurance companies essentially pushed diving boards out of everyday life, but not because the data said diving boards were too dangerous, but because the vibes were just too risky. The threat and risk of lawsuits was higher. A flawed government study spooked everyone, and a trade group that buried warnings and withdrew safety standards made risk pretty impossible to price. Diving boards are a direct case study in how insurers can shape what we do and what starts to disappear. Petting zoos, metal slides at playgrounds, even haunted houses. And here I thought Americans were just overly afraid of danger. Turns out it's not just actual danger that drives things out of existence. It's the perception, it's the feeling of danger. Combined with the media and lawyers poised to strike, that makes insurers pull the plug on us before we can change our minds. Diving boards, though, have not disappeared entirely, of course. They just shifted into the hands of professionals with stricter oversight, deeper pools, and a different set of rules. And this place says it all. At the Fort Lauderdale Aquatic Center, owned and operated by the city of Fort Lauderdale, the city offloads risk. USA Diving, the sport's national governing body, covers member clubs and athletes during sanctioned competitions and practices with a general liability insurance for injuries or property damage, and excess participant accident insurance that helps with medical costs. And today, the Fort Lauderdale Aquatic Center is a fortress of controlled risk. Home to Olympians and world-class athletes like the Aquatic Center's high dive coach and former Red Bull cliff diver, Stephen LeBeau.
So the impact from 27 meters, the athletes are entering the water at about 55 miles an hour. At 55 miles an hour, the athletes are stopping and decelerating to zero in about 15 feet. I would encourage anyone that's around to come see it for themselves, because watching it live and how hard they hit the water, it's really tremendous.
And it makes total sense why I'm not allowed to jump off of the tallest diving platform in the Western Hemisphere. James and other divers who jump at the Aquatic Center carry their own insurance, train obsessively, and follow every rule. But even with tight controls and training, it is obviously still terrifying from that high up in the air.
27 meter, like, There's always a risk, even if it's your easiest dive, you've done it 1,000 times. It's just that the respect of the height. The hardest part about the sport is jumping.
Insurance companies might have pushed diving boards out of my life because they chase the vibes. But I will gladly leave the jumping to James.